That's awesome. Yeah. We we generally do have the Yeti mic,
Hmm.
the podcast mics,
Hmm.
but these computers that we're live streaming on, they don't have the attachment to hook up. They don't have the USB attachment because they're all like the modern Macs. So we have to have like all these like different connectors and adapters and things, and it's
Yeah, I don't think anyone uses CDs anymore, but I do. And I just discovered that my laptop doesn't have a CD drive, and I think I was like more upset than it maybe counts for for where technology is at right now.
yeah, no, but no, this is super cool. I'm like really excited about this because yeah, I mean I love the fact you guys are Michigan based, and we have so many customers that love the mushroom kits. They're really cool. They're super cool, and I our area is like our area here in Michigan where we're at is kind of like 5 years behind trend. So like
We have a
when mush
massive town over here.
when mushrooms were like becoming a huge thing, no one could have cared they could care less. But then as soon as like mushrooms became super widespread, all of a sudden someone like over here, all of a sudden like the stores, like our grocery store even, all of a sudden was like, let's stock lion's mane mushroom. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like lion's mane has been a thing for like 4 years. Where have you been? Where have you been
Yeah,
at?
like I don't know, like was there a secret club of people that were lion's mating way before everyone else did, or
It,
I don't know.
yeah,
It's
it's really
been really
strange. It's
cool
super,
seeing it catch on though. The one thing
yeah,
I haven't gotten into yet is the mushroom coffee. It like there's something about the texture. I'm a diehard Maxwell House person. And so the mushroom coffee I just haven't really gotten into, but we started taking my mom's a beekeeper and we started doing like functional mushroom infused honey. And when you cook lion's mane, it tastes like crab, but when you dehydrate it, it gets really chocolatey. And
ooh,
yeah, and so if you mix dried powdered lion's mane with really good honey, it's awful with bad honey. You got to get like good honey. But you mix it in there and it turns into like Sanders fudge. Like it's the craziest thing. And so we like that for coffees and
that's
beverages.
pretty wild.
Yeah, and we actually made I did a thing at the Michigan Science Center. We did like a cooking demo in their science stage, and we were making no-bake cookies, like classic chocolate no-bake cookies of our childhood. And we used lion's mane powder instead of any kind of chocolate, and it was so good, and the whole building smelled like chocolate. So it's really wild. I guess that's the first question here. Also, anonymous attendee, thank you for the volume alert. I appreciate it. Let me know if I get inaudible. And then there's a question here. Never having had the types of mushrooms we're talking about, what do they taste like? And so just this workshop, we're talking about lion's mane, blue oyster, and pink oyster, which are three of my like absolute favorites. We picked those ones for this because they kind of like if you have all three of them, you have such a wide range of flavor and texture and stuff going on. It's just amazing. So the pink oyster mushrooms, which are actually pink, they taste like bacon. And it's really hard to tell the difference when you cook them up. They're so delicious and wonderful. And we make mushroom macaroni and cheese with them. And if you fry cheese and then put that on top of mac and cheese, it's like, do that. It's a good choice. And then let's see, lion's mane is like very crab-like, and you can actually make crab cakes with them. And they're so good. I mean, I'm going to say that about every single mushroom. They're just so good. I run into a lot of people, like every single event or thing we do, someone comes up to me and they're like, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, oh, I know what you're going to tell me. And then they say, I hate mushrooms. And I'm like, that's okay. But a lot of the time when people say that, it's because they've just been getting like the typical button mushrooms off the grocery store shelf. They've been there a little too long. They haven't been loved. They're a little rough. So people are always like, oh, I have this big texture issue with mushrooms. But actually, there are so many different kinds of gourmet mushrooms with such a huge range of flavor and texture that it's likely that you just haven't found your mushroom yet. And so blue oyster is one that I recommend to people who are not necessarily as flavor adventurous. It's got kind of like a proteiny, like chicken type texture to it, and it's not too aggressive on the flavor. And we have just had so much fun with that because depending on how you season it or marinate it or fry it, it's just outrageously good. So.
Yeah.
The most recent thing is that we did bulgogi, like a Korean barbecue with it, and it was just I actually ate
Yeah.
4 servings. So yeah. So I know you've tinkered with some mushroom growing.
Yeah, we've grown. We have a few kits that we've done throughout. I mean, even when grow your own mushroom kits were first starting out, there was like a boxed kit you could get, and we got I got it as like a Christmas gift. I don't probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe even longer, and really super cool. The idea of growing my own mushrooms is something that obviously like I would really like to do on a larger scale, and it's something that I would like to do just even for my own knowledge sake, just learn. I think it's a cool thing about like what you're doing here is that like we do so much of vegetables and herbs and fruits and whatnot. The fungal side is so unknown to me. I mean, I know about mushrooms and whatnot, but I wouldn't have a single clue of how to properly grow them. So I'm really looking forward to learning actually because at our farm that we have up and running now, one thing that I
Congratulations,
really
by the
like to
way.
do is I would like to have a little hardwood stand of like some oak or whatever or like maple and like drill the holes and like do the little pegs and have our own like regenerative mushroom farm because my thing is I hate having to go identify them because I don't feel confident identifying. So like growing my own, like I feel very confident with what comes out of these kits that I could eat that. Whereas if I go to the woods and I'm just like rummaging around, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna eat any of these.
Well,
I'm not.
that's how I got into growing. I was in advertising for 12 years, did not plan on becoming the mushroom lady. Like I grew up on a farm in a farm community, but totally not my game plan. I went to school for experimental animation, like totally different channel. And I was driving down the road in Auburn Hills about 12 years ago, and I was going past Bald Mountain State Recreation Area, which is awesome if you haven't been there. But there was a sign that was like mushroom foraging workshop today. It was free. It was happening in 5 minutes. And I did like the cartoon pull off the road and I like ran into the woods and my life was forever changed. Um, but it actually, we spent like 3 hours in the woods and this guy knew everything and it was so inspiring. And I would love to figure out who he was. I would love to like connect with him and tell him like the wild path that has occurred because of him. But I got to the end of the workshop and I was so scared I was going to pick the wrong kind of mushroom and die. And that is ultimately what led to like just tinkering a little bit with growing mushrooms. And then it spun out of control. And, it's been wild. But, 10 years later, I teach all over the place. I am the president of the Soil to Service, which owns the Detroit Institute of Gastronomy. And I have kits in 350 stores and it's crazy and every single minute is a learning experience, but I did not expect to become the mushroom lady.
Yeah, no, it's really super cool. That's why we were behind it 100% when you started rolling these out because again, being from Michigan and having you do the education side of things, it really allowed us to be more well-rounded with our product offering, but also building awareness around just being a little more self-sustainable in your own way. Just
Mhm.
because a lot of people, I mean, mushrooms are such an important part to. I was never even a mushroom person, really. Cindy got me into mushrooms when we first started dating. She got me into mushrooms. I was never really that big into mushrooms,
Mhm.
and so I realized really early on, like just how not only how delicious they are, but how sustaining, like they really are very sustaining to a diet or to a meal. And so like in terms of just overall empowering people to grow their own and to do things themselves, it's super, super, super cool. So I'm happy that you've done so well. It's really super awesome to see.
Well, thank you for being part of it. It's I love figuring out like every time you roll out new seeds, I'm like, ooh, this could be like a combo dish kind of thing. We should start putting out little like recipe cards that are like suggested gardens with a snackums plan on the back. But
Yeah.
I was gonna say before we dive into the bucket, y'all need to do a whole bunch of wine caps on your farm. Are you familiar with wine cap mushrooms?
I've heard of them, but I've never grown, obviously never grown them.
So they have these like they're big. They have these big caps and they have like the regular wine caps have like a rosy kind of Merlot color to them. Golden wine caps have a golden cap to them, but they're big, like storybook looking mushrooms. And they're fairly easy to plant, but we really think of those as the gardener's mushroom. And you basically, like today, like we're going to be using grain spawn, and we'll talk about all this in a minute. But this is basically you grow mushroom tissue on, in this case, it's rye, but there's many things. We use a lot of rice, and you can use corn, a million other things. But so you use grain spawn, and you actually just steep your a bunch of wood chips. Like they have to be hardwood chips, but you steep them in hot water and just let them sit overnight, do their thing, and then you kind of make like a bed. And a lot of people do like the edges of their garden pathways, and you just crumble that in with bits of this grain spawn, and it gets all colonized with that. And wine caps are really awesome because they pop up a few times throughout the season. So you're gonna see them in springtime, but you might get some throughout the summer, and then you get this next like big flush in the fall. And so it's cool because you can kind of work that into your garden harvest throughout the year. And then someone actually just asked a really good question, which is, can they be canned like button mushrooms? And absolutely. Actually, I have my favorite pressure cooker right here, so I'm gonna grab it.
It's so cool.
It's dusty because it's been working, but it is one of my beloved pressure cookers. I have 12, and these are, I use the All-American pressure cookers because they're really heavy duty instead of like rolled aluminum, which get like dented and dangerous. These are actually cast aluminum, and I shouldn't have lifted it up with the thing not attached. There we go. So these are actually cast aluminum, and so it's like a little less perilous to use when you're running a bunch of pressure cookers at once, or you're doing a ton of canning, so you're not wearing it out. But we do all kinds of canning with mushrooms. You can just do all kinds of different savory things. Like even steering to the sweet side, like you could steer into like a cowboy candy type recipe with pink oyster mushrooms and really get that flavor in there. The one thing I have found with oyster mushrooms is they don't really taste good raw. They taste like metallic and bland. So when you do want to cook those or eat those, you want to cook them up. And if you're going to do something like a canning type process, you do want to like do something where they're like slightly cooked first. They're going to get cooked more in that canning process. But you can really get some very nice treats in there. You can make your own spin on like baked beans and stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah,
Well, do you all want to grow some mushrooms?
let's do it. Yeah,
All
let's do
right.
it.
So, and we have, I will just say right now, we have had a handful of you who have had to be very patient with shipping of this week, and I'm so sorry for how thoroughly that got delayed. And thank you for bearing with. But we'll get you all sorted out, and I'm really excited for the other session we're doing on Tuesday. And on that note, I've had a handful of people struggling to get logged in or find a certain email or anything. Make sure you check your spam email, because it seems like we are getting caught in people's spam box, and there's like important information and reminders of things to do with your mushrooms and stuff like that. So we don't want you to miss out on that. So we've got you, but thank you. So I have a bucket of straw here. And the cool thing, let's see, you are growing blue oyster and lion's mane, right?
Yep.
Cool. And I've got my handy dandy bag of lion's mane spawn here. And can you see this okay if I'm like holding it, or does it get blurry? It's
Yep.
the rough idea. So this is more rye that is covered with mycelium. This fluffy white stuff is actually the underground network of like what's happening beneath the forest, and what mushrooms grow out of. And trees actually use mycelium under the forest to send electrical impulses to their seedlings, to send messages and let them know like you need more of this nutrient, or there's danger coming. And I'm not really sure specifically like what a tree would identify as a danger to a seedling, but there's something. And so there's a lot interwoven with mycelium that is a great connector. There's been a lot of research, specifically on blue oyster mushrooms, where they actually have a language of at least 150 words, and at a minimum, they have a short-term memory. So on my more like nerdy side of things, I'm digging into like, are they nature's ancient data storage system? You know, what can we find out that's hidden in there that we can use and explore? And one of the really cool things that we have taken a deep dive into is how mushrooms and mycelium can be used for environmental restoration, because they'll actually pick up like toxins, different kinds of bacteria like E. coli. You can even use them to extract heavy metals from land and water. So we're diving into some really cool research projects where we're exploring different ways to renew the Great Lakes watershed using mycelium. So these are like infinitely amazing, wonderful things, and I'm just crazy about the oyster mushrooms. So anyway, so this was grain spawn, and I'm looking for some culture here so I can explain how this happens real quick. Before we do that though, take your straw and you need to soak it in some water. Do you have a bucket of water?
Ready so stars. Well, Michelle did.
Huh? Oh, did they already? Michelle rocks.
Yeah, she's an angel.
She's still on it. Yeah. So just take that and don't put all of it in. You just want like an inch in there first. And I'm gonna put mine in the soak here. Yeah, that looks perfect. So basically what I'm doing, I don't know if you can actually see what I'm doing. I have a pitcher of water here. This is the small scale version. I usually use a 55-gallon drum to do about a bale of compressed straw. I use straw from the farm stand on the road, but sometimes it gets like dirt road dust on it and then some more cleaning and stuff that I want to deal with. So if you go to like Family Farm and Home or Tractor Supply, you can get a big bag of totally clean, all natural chopped straw, which is what is in all those kits and supplies. And it's really nice because they do a really good job of keeping it clean. They have it chopped up nice and little, so you're not like dealing with these big clumps of straw that you're trying to fit into a container. So there's a lot of reasons I really like using the chopped straw versus a bale of straw, but either works perfectly fine. What I typically do if we're doing a lot of straw is I take the big plastic 55-gallon drums and I drill a little hole in the bottom and I put a cooler spout on it. And then you do a thing called cold water pasteurization where you put that whole bale in the barrel and then you use hydrated lime, just like you would use to get it over here. This is hydrated lime. It's just like what you would use to raise the pH level in your soil. And it's a really, really great tool for mushroom growing. A bag this size for like a normal person growing mushrooms will last you a lifetime. I go through it a lot because we do a lot of workshops and different projects and I grow a lot of mushrooms. So we go through it. But in a 55-gallon drum, you use like maybe a third of a cup of that. If you're feeling very enthusiastic, maybe like a cup, but that's like a lot. And you basically just take all your straw, you put sprinkles of that in there, and then you take the garden hose and fill it up with cold water, throw the lid that you took off on it, and then you just let that sit for like 12 hours. And what happens is that raises the pH level way up and then it drops it way down. And when it raises up, it kills off a whole bunch of different microbes that are hiding in the straw so that it's really clean and nice to work with. A lot of the time with tap straw, especially, I'm gonna have to look up the brand that I've been buying of this. The stuff that they've been sending me has been so clean that we've had oyster mushrooms and lion's mane and a few other varieties doing really well on them without needing to do a huge amount of pasteurization. Anytime I'm doing bigger buckets though, that's when I get really serious about making sure we knock out any microbes, because the idea with mushrooms growing is when you have your grain spawn here and it's getting all colonized, you're going to add that to your straw in layers and then it colonizes through the bucket and everything gets covered with this mycelium, this fluffy white stuff. And when you do that, time is of the essence. And so when there's any kind of bacteria or like other spores or like maybe some shaggy manes got in there and whatever it is, but it'll slow down your mushrooms, or you can get some like moldy spots in there that are not great. So with smaller containers, I don't tend to do as long of soak times or I'll just, let it do a nice hot water steep for a while and it's good to go, like gallon or less. I'm good with that. A bigger container, I generally encourage people to either do cold water pasteurization or to do hot water pasteurization before they use their straw, just so that they have an extra jump on things. Hot water pasteurization is you literally soak your straw in hot or boiling water. And um, we created the mushroom growing program for U of M School for Environment and Sustainability. And they have this whole dorm that it's freshmen only, and you have to like apply and get accepted to live in this dorm. And they all like put their heart and soul into sustainable living, and they eat together and they garden together and they do all these amazing things. And so they brought us in to like help them create a mushroom growing program. And they actually let us build out the whole basement of the dorm as a mushroom growing space, which was really, really fun. But the first time we set it up, we were doing 65-gallon buckets, not 65, 65-gallon buckets. And there were 2 flights of stairs between where the water was boiling and where the straw was going into the water and getting assembled. So by the end of that day, everyone was so cooked. That's when I switched over to doing cold pasteurization for our other stuff. So right now I'm just putting my straw in water so I can get caught up with Luke and Cindy because they've got me beat at my own game. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how grain spawn is made. With what we're doing, if you've got bucket supplies or you're getting bucket supplies, that comes with grain spawn that's already been made, just so you don't have to wait a couple weeks for it to colonize. But if you use one of our kits or you go get a mushroom culture somewhere, you can actually make your own grain spawn, and it's very exponential. A tiny bit. Let's see. I've got a culture syringe over here. Like the room of requirement in Harry Potter. It's like the desk of requirement. It always has the stuff. Let's see.
Yeah, it kind of gives me a like a sourdough vibe.
It's
Like
such a sourdough kind of thing.
yeah, it seems like it. Question for you, Erin. So you might talk about this already, so if you do, forgive me, but like my thing is like obviously there's not that many poisonous mushrooms. So I think that's I from what the research that I've done, that is a very like overblown fear. Obviously, you should definitely research before you eat a mushroom, but still regardless, like if we're talking about a true culture, like this is a true blue oyster culture here. There's a lot of other like fungal spores and stuff in the air. There's yeast cultures, like everything's in the air.
Yeah.
So when you make this up, the big question that I have is like, what is the risk of something foreign colonizing this before the blue oyster?
That's a really good question. So just a fun fact really quick, because this number always amazes me. There's around 14,000 identified species of mushrooms right now, and an estimated 3 to 4 million in existence. And so like there's all these that we're aware of where they're like poisonous or delicious or dangerous or whatever. And then there's all these left to be discovered. So that's just side note, like part of my obsession. But with like you're saying, there's so much fungi in our atmosphere. A lot of people don't realize this. There's like, no matter how clean your house is, there's ambient spores. There is all kinds of just little bits of life in the air. And so you do want to be careful when you're preparing grain spawn. Once it's grain spawn and it's colonized, it's got a pretty good jump on things. Like usually at that point, it's going to just beat whatever is trying to catch up. Because if it's a spore versus a grain spawn, it's at a couple steps behind it. So you really just want to let it do its thing. But usually if that were to happen, what you would experience would be more like, my mushrooms aren't growing, or why does this stink, or what is that weird mushroom? And the only kind of mushroom we run into that consistently we see pop up, especially if you're getting straw, like farm stand straw, and I'm a fan of farm stand straw, so don't don't get me wrong, but if you use that and you don't pasteurize it, you'll see a lot of those shaggy mane mushrooms come up, and those are also called inky caps, and they're so interesting. They're decomposers, so they grow, and you can apparently eat them if you get them in time, but I've never tried it and I probably won't. But the caps, as soon as they unfold, then they turn into this goo and they completely self-destruct. And they look straight out of a Tim Burton movie. So it makes people panic when that happens. But typically it's just like, you had some really well-natured straw and it did its thing. But most of the time, if you do get some kind of contaminant, you're more likely to run into like mold or something like that. I saved a bad mushroom block to show you what a contaminated mushroom block looks like. For this one, this was a lion's mane block that we had going recently. And then it hit its limit, and I do not like to open these, but I wanted to show you guys. So see how this, let's see, is that clear enough? Kind of.
Yeah, it's clear. Yeah.
Okay. So this has like some really gnarly looking green and black and white mold on it. And that is much more likely the kind of contamination you'll run into where it's gonna do that and then stink and then not grow. It'll battle your existing mushrooms. So yeah, but you're very unlikely to like, oops, I grew the wrong mushroom and it's toxic. And another thing is a lot of times people think like, oh no, I walked past a potentially poisonous mushroom. Like, am I gonna die? Like, what's going on? Or like they touched it, so panic. There are no currently known species of mushrooms that are toxic to the touch. So it's pretty cool. But you don't have to worry too much about that. It's just like, kind of like you said, I'm just now getting to a point where I'm like confident foraging the standards. But I'm still a very cautious forager. So I figured out where my culture is. You have forest on your new farm, don't you?
We don't have much. We don't have much. There's it's more like the little windrow break. There's the other portion that eventually we're going to be moving, like we're going to be purchasing in blocks. The final block that we'll eventually get does have a really good hardwood stand of things like oaks and maples, which is great.
Oh, cool. I was just gonna say, you can also do, a lot of people ask if you can grow morels, and those are, they take 5 to 7 years to grow, but you can do like a slurry process, and you basically put morel culture into the blender with a tablespoon of molasses. You fill it up the rest of it with water. You could also use just a fresh morel mushroom if you're lucky and you have one. You blitz it for a second, and then you put it into a bucket with a few scoops of ash from a wood fireplace, and then you fill that up the rest of the way, let it sit for another day, and then just pour it into like a 3 by 3 foot mulchy space in your woods and forget about it for 5 to 7 years. And it's a really good way to eventually get some good morels going. So let's see, I have a question, which is, can we get on with it? Which is what we're doing. Be nice. And we're going to show you how to grow some mushroom buckets. So first, I've got my straw steeping here. And I'm just going to tell you about how this works really quick with mushroom spawn. If you want to make mushroom spawn, which if you get really into growing, you're eventually going to want to, because it does add up buying this pre-made. I think this is around 25 or 30 bucks a bag. But it goes really far. Like this would get me like multiple 5 gallon buckets out of this. Like this little bag here is what I'm using for my gallon size bucket. So it really is very exponential. If you're making your own culture, these are our little kits. They're the tiniest, most exponential mushroom kits on the market. So this is a mushroom culture, and it's kind of hard to see from there. But basically what happens is we take either light malt extract or honey. Some people use corn syrup. I'm not a corn syrup person, so I don't. But you do that, you make a special jar, a culture jar, and you put you drill 2 holes in the top of it. You've got like a little injection port and an air filter, and then you just fill that all the way up with water, and you put like a tablespoon of your malt extract or honey in there, and you pressure cook that with the lid on. And then you just put a tiny bit, you could either use a mother culture, which is like the strongest top of the DNA chain culture, and inject just a tiny bit into that. Or you could also take a little bit of living mushroom tissue if you like split open a mushroom so that you get to like the really clean inner surface where it's not going to necessarily have been exposed to too many environmental contaminants. And you can just like use a syringe to pull a little bit of that out and inject it right into that jar. And so it's kind of like this tinkery nerd process, which is why I like it. And so I grow all of our cultures, but that's where culture comes from. But then once you have that, you actually only need 1 milliliter. This is a 5 milliliter syringe. You only need 1 milliliter of culture to start a 5-gallon bucket of mushrooms. So one of these is enough to do 5 5-gallon buckets of mushrooms growing. And each one of those is going to average, for oysters, it'll average a 5-gallon bucket gets about 4 pounds per flush. A flush is your harvest, and each bucket tends to get 2 or 3 flushes. So you can get like a healthy mushroom bucket. You're looking at, for a 5-gallon bucket, about 12 pounds of mushrooms. It's well hydrated and everything. So anyway, what happens on the simplest level, if you don't want to use a pressure cooker and you just want to make your grain spawn and do that, you can cook brown rice, or you can buy those little packets of like Ben's original brown rice, whole grain brown rice. And the stuff that's pre-cooked, like I don't really know what occasion that's for eating, but you can also use it if you cut just the corner off the bag. I always tell people to turn their fan off before they do this because that really does get that dust and stuff moving around. It makes things settle more. You wipe down your bag with just rubbing alcohol so it's clean. You cut your corner off, and then you just put that 1 milliliter into the bag and inject it. And then you use paper bandage tape, which you guys have this on your buckets. It's like the paper surgical tape. It's not the cloth surgical tape. And basically this is allows your mushrooms to breathe, and it keeps all the bad stuff out. Mushrooms need a decent amount of air to be able to grow. So it really is the ultimate tool. It's about $1.50 a roll, and we use it all day. So what happens is you take your paper bandage tape and you tape those corners shut after you've cut them open, and you want to make it so they kind of like are little airports. And if you're using pre-cooked rice, it has a clear window on the bottom. So you can actually just like peek in the little window on the bottom. And when it starts getting this white stuff growing on it, that's when you know it's ready. You just want to make sure like most of it's covered with it, and then you can crumble it up to get it to grow a little more. So that's how you get to this point. You can also cook your own brown rice. If you just cook it, and while it's still really, really hot, you put it into a freezer bag and you squeeze out all the air, and then you let it cool, and then you basically do the same thing. But with that, you know, it's cheaper than the packs of rice, but depends on how much time you have. So anyway, that's how you get to grain spawn. You also, like with commercial growing, you're more likely going to be using like rye. Some people will use oats, like not rolled oats, but just oats in their natural form, all kinds of different grains. But with home growing, when you're just getting started and it's like you don't want to get like a pressure cooker, a bunch of gear, this is like the fast way to do that. So anyway, lucky us, we have grain spawn, so we didn't just have to spend 3 weeks making some. So we're going to take your bucket, and I threw in a couple little alcohol wipes there with your supplies. And you just want to wipe down your bucket. Oh, thank you. Let's see. No prior knowledge. Yes. Amy, so we are going to go through that whole process right now, and everyone says I talk too fast, so I'm going to try to not talk too fast and just explain this step by step so it's really doable, because it really is very, very easy, and you got this. So what you do is you've got your bucket arrives, depending, if you have a box that had like multiple buckets, I probably wound up putting some of it in zip bags so that it would all fit nicely in there. If you got one bucket, I probably just filled the bucket with straw so that it would travel nice and be easy to do. So what you're gonna do, first order of business, you're gonna take that straw, and I will make sure to send out like a written copy of these instructions too, just so you have a nice reference point. But you'll take your straw. I'm using this pitcher. You can use a bucket or a pot or whatever holds water. You just, all that straw that came with it, you put it in there. You want to put enough hot water over it to just soak it all really well. Part of it's hydrating it, part of it's getting rid of any little microbes. I used the really good straw for your supplies, so it's probably going to be like a easy to it kind of thing. So, all right, so my straw is soaking. That is all we've done here so far. And then while my straw is soaking, if I have time, I usually let that sit for a couple hours. If I don't have time, I won't rush it for a 5-gallon bucket, but for a smaller bucket, you can just let it sit there for a while, and when you're ready to use it, use it. But you're letting that get hydrated, and you're kind of getting rid of some microbes and stuff. So I'm just using 70% isopropyl alcohol wipes. So you have some little ones there for wiping down your buckets. And I do prefer wiping down buckets with peroxide, but it's so harsh on your skin that I generally just tell people to do that if they decide to, but I'm not going to be part of it because it is not pleasant if you get it on your hands and then you forget to rinse them off. So anyway, the idea is we're just getting rid of any extra contaminants that might have landed on this container. And then I drilled all these buckets ahead of time because I figured everybody didn't feel like drilling buckets. But it's pretty easy. I wonder if I left my drill. Well, I use a thing called a step bit. It's kind of like a drill bit shaped like a ice cream cone. And it works way better than using a regular size drill bit or a regular shaped drill bit, because when you're using a regular drill bit, it tends to crack plastic pretty quickly. And we went through about 100 of these containers a couple years ago before we discovered step bits. So when you use a step bit, that actually just like gradually works its way into drilling a hole. So it's a much nicer process and it doesn't break the plastic. And so especially when you're doing 5-gallon buckets or anything that's got like some heft to it that you really need to drill and don't want to, have it get broken and the expense of that, definitely get a step bit. They're like $7 and they're an awesome tool. So what we have here, I'm going to walk over so you can see this a little better. So I drilled 3 of these holes in each bucket. And then we use the paper managed tape to tape over those. So your buckets arrive pre-taped. But if you were doing this again, you would just go get a nice roll of paper tape and then make sure all the holes are covered. And now we get to do the fun part. So just to recap on that, put your straw in the water, wipe off your bucket, drill some holes in it, wipe it off again. You could probably just not wipe it off before you drill it, but wipe it down really well. And then you're going to take some of your straw. So in gardening, you hear the term field capacity a lot, right? Where you want your soil to be not like sopping wet, but you want it to like retain some moisture. And that's what you're going for with your straw here. So you just scoop out what you need from the bucket where you've got it soaking. And you want to put an inch or two in the bottom to start with. That's just starting a nice base. You guys are like totally on it already. You know what you're doing.
Can you ever drill too many holes?
Yes. So it's really interesting because if you have fewer holes, you're going to get bigger mushrooms, but not as many. So you're getting volume over quantity. If you wanted to get a whole bunch of little mushrooms, you do a bunch of holes and they all come out in these like little pearly clusters. So it's really interesting. And they do kind of shift and change for how you do the holes. Usually, like a bucket this size, we have decided that 3 holes is perfect on a gallon. Sometimes we use these tall clear gallons, and sometimes we use these shorter white round gallons, like an ice cream tub. And both of them, we do the same number of holes, and didn't even realize we were doing that, but it just is the right amount. The other thing I do, I don't do this as much with big buckets, but with smaller buckets where you're likely to set this on your kitchen counter or something, you're probably gonna set it like against a wall or something, and then you're gonna forget to look behind it. So I usually don't drill holes in the back side of it because I've had so many times where I'll get a big mushroom growing out the back, and not realize it and just think they're not growing. So now if I'm doing like I have a 10 by 20 foot grow tent, and we're really strategic with how we set up those mushroom buckets so that the ones that are gonna line the walls are not growing out the back where you can't really get to them easily and you got all these heavy buckets. So you can get really strategic with how you do the holes. A 5 gallon bucket as a rule of thumb is you're gonna do like 8 to 12 holes. Let's see. Oh, there's a button for answering live, so we know who I'm answering. Yes, there are written instructions in the kits, and they go through the process of making grain spawn with rice, and then they go through taking that and preparing a straw bucket and doing all that. And then they also cover if you wanted to do a straw bed outdoors instead of growing indoors or in a bucket. It walks you through that as well. And then if you go on our website, I also have instructions up there for making plug spawn, where you basically take, your grain spawn, and then you prepare hardwood dowel plugs, and then you add this to it. You add some grain spawn to it. Those get colonized, and you can add them to a log. And you want to do about 50 plugs for a 5 or 6 foot log. So you do go through it a lot, and that's another one of those mushroom growing products that adds up a lot. So yeah, but in our kits themselves, like without downloading anything extra, that does take you through preparing the rice and growing it into grain spawn, and then preparing a bucket, and then how to like care for that bucket and what you need to do to harvest it and make it thrive. And there's a word search, so what could you go wrong? But so anyway, so now we have soaked our water. We wiped down our bucket, and it's got the holes in it, it's got the tape. We have 1 inch of field capacity straw in there. And then I'm going to take my grain spawn here. So this is some blue oyster spawn here. And it's just amazing how far this goes. You just need like a little sprinkle of this on the first layer. Like, can you see how much is in my hand there? Just like a sprinkle, like that's maybe a teaspoon in my hand. And you just want to sprinkle it over the top. The idea isn't to like make it all in one place or anything. You just want it to be dispersed so it's touching as much surface area as possible. And once this is filled up higher, so it's easier to look at, I'll hold it up so you can see the surface. But you do that, and then you get a little more straw, and you're gonna layer this all the way up. We call it the lasagna method, and it goes really quickly. And so you just divide however much grain spawn you have throughout that bucket in layers. Some people like to do more layers with a little less spawn. Some people like to do less layers with a little more spawn. So that's just personal preference.
When you're doing your layers, do you press down the straw at all? Can you over compress it, or does that suffocate it, or like how does that?
Yeah, so this you can see like it's got a little fluff left to it. It's not like bricked down, but it's pretty well settled down there. If it's too loose and fluffy, it's gonna dry out, and you're gonna wind up with these like tiny rock formation mushrooms. Mushrooms are 80% water, so the main point of the straw is really for them to get hydration from. Straw does not have a lot of nutrient in it, and mushrooms don't want a lot of nutrient. When you get into working with like cordyceps and a few more complicated species, there's really specific nutrient stuff. But actually with oyster mushrooms, it's more of the goal to find like as little nutrient as possible in it. So the straw is really a vehicle for the water and something for the mycelium to hold on to while that's all growing. So, all right, so you just keep layering. And let's see. I've got straw on my hands. I'm using a mouse.
Another question for you, that I guess like I am super curious about. So obviously that right now they're in grain. The spawn is in grain. But when you start to colonize a bucket of straw, what prevents you from colonizing this and never taking off the tape and just going and then taking this and dumping it into like a 5 gallon bucket? Is
I do
that
that
possible?
all the time. I like a lot of people don't, they'll just toss it in the compost pile, which is a great thing to do. But I actually a lot of the time when I'm have like that block I just showed you that had some contamination going on there, that if it wasn't so contaminated, I would crumble that into a bucket with some straw and it probably kick something out in a few weeks. And then we have this like very experimental compost pile that we've just been heaping more and more spent blocks into over the past couple of years. The only one I tell people not to do that with is golden oysters, because they've just been populating rampantly and they do a lot of really interesting stuff with environmental remediation. So like I'm a big fan of golden oysters, but they're also spreading so rapidly that everyone's just being cautious about adding to that. They actually escaped from a mushroom block factory in Illinois where they were adding too much to it. So okay, I'm blurry. Is it when I'm back here or when I get closer?
When you're back, right?
Am I like fading into
You're fine right now, but it just fades in and out.
Okay. I think it's on some kind of autofocus fun thing. If I get too hard to see, like tell me. Okay, the volume of the bucket in class is 1 gallon. These are 1 gallon buckets, and I really like these in particular for doing oysters and lion's mane. I like the short buckets too, but these are really cool because you get kind of a nice cascadey thing going on with the height to it. So they space out nicely and we like them. Use let's see. Use a dull drill bit to drill into plastic. A new or sharp bit will grab the plastic and crack the material. Absolutely. That's from Raymond. That's a really good point. If you don't have a step bit, a dull drill bit is your best bet because then it's almost more like heat and friction wearing it down instead of a fresh sharp bit will just destroy your buckets. Thank you, Raymond. Let's see. And Paula, I will try to get a better angle of this bucket when I get it a little fuller so you can get a better view of how I'm layering it here.
So I guess Aaron, just to clarify one thing though. So when it takes over this straw in this 1 gallon bucket, can we could we could we not harvest any mushrooms and could we just inoculate a 5 gallon bucket of straw once the straw, because I guess my thing is like right now the spawn is in grain. But is the grain, I guess, the only vehicle for the spawn? Because you said that the straw kind of just held water, but
Right.
but the mushrooms are breaking down the straw in a way.
They do, and
But
you'll notice over time your I just mixed up my grain spawn. This is a 2 kind of mushroom bucket now. That's a question people ask a lot. If you put 2 kinds of mushrooms, mushroom spawn into a bucket, they'll actually try and compete with each other, and one will eventually win, but it'll be weaker. So I just did that on accident, but it'll be interesting. So yeah, it will eat, the mycelium will eat that straw up over time, and you'll feel the bucket becoming lighter and lighter. And so in between flushes, when you after you've harvested your mushrooms, you have to keep your lid on your bucket like the whole time. Everyone always wants to look under the lid and see what's happening in there. But what you actually need is for CO2 to build up under that lid so that everything knows to grow out the sides. Otherwise, you get like these renegade mushrooms going towards the top, or they'll come out really weird shaped. So you keep that lid on until you harvest your first flush of mushrooms, and then you take the lid off and you soak it in water overnight. And then drain it back off. You just the whole container, you just take the lid off, maybe put it in a pot or something and sometimes you have to put a rock or something heavy on top because mycelium is very floaty. They're making surfboards with it now. And you need something that's going to hold that in place and keep it from bobbing away. But that way you rehydrate it and drain that out. And you can repeat that, like, and you put the lid back on and, a few weeks later more grow. But you can repeat that a few times. Usually once you hit the third time, though, it starts getting weak. And I have tinkered with, at that point, adding it to a 5-gallon bucket. And the only thing I'll say is I don't get as big of harvests doing that way. So a lot of the time I tend to relegate those to like a straw bed outside that I can keep tossing stuff into, and you just add more straw and more mycelium to over time. So it's kind of cool, and you get all these volunteer mushrooms. And a lot of the time you get mushrooms that'll, start having a contamination problem or something indoors, and then you take it outside and it'll just sort itself out. So that's been really interesting. I had one that I took out because it was like, I don't remember what variety it was, but I'd been really excited about it. And it started getting a little moldy on the edges. And so I took it outside and I just tucked it under a bush, like maybe something will happen. And I came back like 2 weeks later and it was gorgeous and looked great and it was growing beautifully. And I ran inside to get my camera and came back 2 minutes later and a squirrel already ate it. So that's my story. But so where do you buy your buckets? That's a good question. So these buckets I got from a restaurant supply store. They are awesome. They're inexpensive, but they have enough heft to them that they hold up really well, and you can use them over and over and over again. You can also go to Walmart and get their Halloween candy buckets. I prefer, for like, if I'm trying to grow in quantity, which most of the time I am, I go to bakeries and I ask them for their frosting buckets. I also have a really awesome collection of Detroit pickle buckets, and those are really good. And so yeah, 5-gallon buckets and 3-gallon buckets, wherever you can get them. A lot of times bakeries just either sell them off for $1 or $2 or give them away to get them out of their way. But you do want to make sure you get a lid for it. A lot of the time you'll get a ton of free buckets and then there's no lids. And most of the time you need a lid for your mushrooms. So, and lids get weirdly expensive. So you'll like get a great deal on your lids and then or on your buckets and then have to spend it all on lids. Let's see. Do you offer wine cap mushroom spawn for an outdoor bed? I don't carry the spawn for it right now, although we probably will by springtime. We have all kinds of spawn schemes going on, but we do make our kits. We do have both wine cap and golden wine cap kits, and MIgardener carries those. So they can get you all set up with those. And so you could, make the spawn on straw or rice or whatever, and then work that into your wood chips. I love wine chips.
Next question for you, Erin. So, and I apologize if this whole thing's new to me, so I'm really excited to learn. Can you ever overdo the medium to the spawn? Is there a certain ratio, like a golden rule that you should stick to? Like if you had like this bag that you provide in these kits, which is super helpful. Let's say you were like me and you don't always listen to instructions the way that you should, and you just like
instructions.
No. I'm just saying, like, I don't. Sometimes I like to be a renegade and just like see what happens. But is there like a golden rule? Like, what is the likelihood of me messing something up if I took that and was like, okay, I'm just gonna take this spawn, because you obviously portioned this out for a 1-gallon container, which is great for an idiot like me. However, if you had like this and you're like, I just want to see what happens and throw it into a 5-gallon bucket, is the ratio, what's that, is there like a golden rule?
So it's a very flexible rule because it's like mycelium is just going to keep growing. And so what you get into with a bigger bucket, I always do use more spawn. I kind of try to keep a similar ratio, maybe just like a little extra for a 5-gallon. But the idea is you just want it to be colonizing as fast as possible so that core of it doesn't get moldy or anything while you're waiting for it to grow. So I just try to make sure when I'm doing my layers, I always put in a 5-gallon bucket, I always put a little extra in the middle, just so that has a better chance. I see your note here. I see your note here, Daniela. Let me try and adjust cameras. I think I can switch to my other camera here and hopefully I'll be able to see better because I know I'm like, it would be really helpful if I was just like slightly taller. I'm actually a very tall person, but this is working out where I'm getting to live my best short life today. So hang on just a second. I'm gonna switch cameras really quick. Okay, well, switching cameras gave us better focus, but I am just putting something here so I can lift stuff up higher because I think that's gonna help more than anything. Yeah. All right, so I put a thing here so we can see a little bit better. Is that,
Whoa, that is so crystal clear now. Oh my
is that
God.
better? You
It's
want to know
it
something
was fine.
funny?
It was fine before too. I mean, like some people were saying how it's just like it was only blurry when if you hold something up, it went back to clear, like it cleared up. But this is like, oh my gosh.
This camera was $20 and that other camera was $3,800. Isn't that crazy? Sometimes it's the simple things. You're just like, you know what? This is perfect.
Yeah, no,
The other camera definitely had a different mood.
So let's see. Got this and then. Okay, let me just make sure I got the questions working my way down here real quick. Okay. All right, so the volume of the bucket is 1 gallon. And yes, they do come pre-drilled and they come with the straw. The game plan here is just to make it so you don't have to go tracking down any weird random stuff and you can just jump in and set up your bucket without any fuss. I think that was the biggest when I first wanted to learn how to grow mushrooms. It was kind of just before people started getting really excited about mushrooms. I was just in the right place at the right time. And the biggest thing I found was that no one was really sharing information, or you would like go on Reddit and people would make fun of you for asking questions or whatever. And so it was really intimidating for me. It was like 2 years of just reading every book I could find because I was scared I was going to mess it up. And I finally like got my nerve together one day and tried, and it was just so much easier than I thought it would be, and so much more exciting than I thought it would be. So when like with everything that we do, we try to make it like really straightforward to get to like, okay, that's how they grow. Like not just a lot of times you get box kits from the grocery store where you can cut an X in the bag and you spray them with water and then mushrooms grow, which is incredibly cool and it's a great starting point to like see how those are growing and what's happening and kind of experience some of those flavors when you might not otherwise have access to those mushrooms. But they don't like you get to the end of it and then you're like, well, I'm not really sure what just happened, but that was neat. I can't replicate it. And so my goal for you is to give you all the pieces to all the steps so you can go like, okay, this is how this works. I don't have to go track stuff down and get intimidated and then work my courage back up and go find it. And hopefully it makes it a little easier. And then I keep forgetting to hit the answer live button until after I answer. And the website address is, my website is themushroomconservatory.com. And I will type that in here. And then obviously MIgardener is MIgardener.com. And they also carry our kits too. So I always cheer for people going to them as well. And a lot of times people think it's the Mushroom Conservancy. It's the Mushroom Conservatory. A lot of people think it's the Mushroom Conservancy. So let's see. Making sure everyone's caught up here before we keep going. Let's see. All right, we got the table. Yes, that's a good question, Laura. Would you wear gloves in larger bucket cultures? So there are like multiple schools of thought about like how sterile you should be about this. I know people who like their rules are like you have to take your clothes out of the dryer while they're still hot and put them on immediately after taking a shower and then pour rubbing alcohol over your head and completely disinfect everything. And that's like that is how mushroom growing works to them. I know other people like me who are very like the mushrooms have been growing in the dirt forever and I'm just here helping them now. So I tend to be a lot more lax on that side of things, and you'll find people all the way across the spectrum. Personally, I almost never wear gloves when I'm doing like the spawn and straw layers. I just make sure my hands are washed very well. I'll usually wipe them down with isopropyl alcohol. Important thing, we always tell people to use 70% isopropyl alcohol, not 90%. If you're in any of the sciences, you know why. 90% is highly flammable. Our kits, we don't use needles on the syringes. About a year into business, I started freaking out about how many needles we were just sending too many places, and we were like, why does everyone have to use needles for these? Because the typical way was just like you would get a culture and then inject it into whatever bag. And we were like, well, you could just get the syringes that have the, now I can show you things. This is great. So this is a culture syringe, now that you can see it. And we just get like the little flip tip, like oral syringes, like you would get for kids' medicine or whatever. And so you don't have to deal with sharp stuff. But if you are getting cultures that have needles in them, usually it's like a veterinary needle, so they're bigger. And you want to sterilize those before you're using them and injecting with them into your substrate, or I'm sorry, into your spawn. But usually people will wipe them down with rubbing alcohol and then hold them over a flame. If you have the wrong kind of rubbing alcohol, it's catastrophic. So just make sure, try to steer towards the 70%. So, but I didn't even answer your question. Gloves. So I don't typically wear gloves. I know people that do. A lot of the time when people do wear gloves for assembling their buckets, it's more like a sensory thing. Like they don't like touching earth stuff. So I tend to not worry about it. But I do usually wear work gloves when I'm doing stuff with like large amounts of straw and putting in like my big barrels or whatever. Because I have these big, they're like they remind me of chicken run, but they're these big rubber yellow gloves that are everything proof and they go up to your armpits. And they're great because if it's really cold out and you're mixing all this straw and cold water and stuff, it doesn't make your hands hurt so bad. But if you're dealing with a bunch of straw and stuff, like you're gonna get all the little straw hives and itchy spots. And so that's when I would actually recommend some kind of gloves, is if you're doing that. Or, when you're harvesting oyster mushrooms and lion's mane mushrooms are like around $18 a pound retail. So if you get really into mushroom growing, you're like, I'm gonna start a farmer's market booth, or I'm gonna start selling to restaurants or whatever, then just like on the food, cleanliness, respect side of things, I typically encourage people to wear gloves for harvest. But that's just like if you're selling your mushrooms. And then does the medium you grow the mushroom in determine the quality of the product? Example, growing chaga normally grows on a damaged birch tree, but when cultured in straw or rice, the end result is of a different quality and or makeup. Is there a better medium or for different species? Yes, that's a great question. So, like there are a lot of mushrooms that won't grow on straw or like, with chaga, where it's just kind of a shell of what it should be because it needs whatever it is that it's getting to build up that way. I have a spreadsheet that I made that actually goes through like the ideal types of wood or substrate for different types of mushroom. Just as kind of like a little cheat sheet, and it's helped me out a lot. I don't mind sharing it, so I'll post it somewhere. One of my email updates, I will make sure to send a link to that. That's a handy little chart. Kind of gives you a good idea. Like oyster mushrooms will grow on most hardwoods, but they do not like pine. Pine has actually got an antifungal properties, so there aren't that many mushrooms that want to grow on it. So it gets really interesting. But I also worked with a program in Uganda where we were teaching women and girls how to grow mushrooms so they could start micro businesses and sell mushrooms in the market and then have food when there's not food. So it was a really cool program. And one of the challenges we ran into, professional mushrooms, that's amazing. One of the challenges we ran into is just finding like a growing medium that could support this without them having to like go find these super clean bales of straw or, you know, hunting down materials that just don't exist there while they're already up against some like pretty intense climate issues to try and grow mushrooms in. And so what they ultimately landed on was using dried banana leaves, and they work great. And oyster mushrooms love banana leaves. And a lot of people will actually do kind of like tomatoes, where you'll like soak banana peels in water and then, you know, add that to your tomatoes. You can use banana peel water if you heat it up with your straw, and that theoretically creates bigger oyster mushrooms. And let's see. Okay, as soon as I hold anything up, it's been clear. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Does bucket color matter, clear or white? No, that's a great question, Ted. Thank you. So it really doesn't matter. A lot of people think that mushrooms have to grow in total darkness. That's actually not true. They don't photosynthesize the way a plant does, but they do use light as a way to figure out which way is up. And if oyster mushrooms, I'm sure this is true for other mushrooms, but it's officially proven for oyster mushrooms that if they get a little bit of sunlight, their vitamin D level actually goes way up, which is amazing if you're, you know, like us in the Midwest in the winter and you just need some sunshine. So, yeah, so I just lost my train of thought. Vitamin D, light. Yeah. So we've done a lot of tinkering side by side because I do a lot with like kids in the science programs. And if you have the option to give a kid like a clear bucket so they can see what's happening, like a mushroom ant farm kind of situation, they get way more into it. So I spent a long time tinkering to see if that would work. And I have noticed absolutely no difference other than I think that I get a pretty great harvest out of the clear ones. So I have not run into issues with that. One thing I am cautious about though, like a lot of the time, you know, you'll take a bucket this size and you can set it on your kitchen counter, let it get a little sunlight throughout the day, and it does really well there. But you don't want to let it sit in the sun where it's getting so hot that it starts fermenting from the bottom because it'll die off. So we're gonna just keep building up our buckets. You guys beat me by a mile getting this done. Let's see. So all right. Oh, what does moldy on the edges look like? Let me show you this block again now that we can see. I put it far away from me because I didn't want it near me. So all right, so like this, if you first look at it is clear, like this, is it focused? Okay, so here, this isn't really like, there's no contamination spreading visibly here. But if you look here, there's like, you see those nasty like green lumps? So it's kind of like a moldy kind of bread or something. And the thing is, if you're seeing it like that, it's already in the core of the block. Like once you're seeing it, it's already worked its way through it largely. So yeah, I guess when I say moldy on the edges, just trying to keep an eye on that, where it's like the more exposed to the elements part of the container, you're likely to see it first. Sometimes you can, you know, if you have a block like that one, it's probably got some contamination to the core, but out of curiosity, you could cut off the gross side of it and like go stick it in the ground and let it sit and just see what happens. And there's a good chance it'll clean itself up. So, um, Let's see. Okay, moldy on the edges. Okay.
I know
Oh,
there
and
was
hi, Amy in Somerset, Massachusetts, zone 7A.
so a lot of our customers they ask, and I'll be honest, I feel bad not knowing the answer, so I'd love the answer to this. A lot of them ask when they make their kits, uh, if they feel, and I think you kind of touched on this a little bit because you said like you want to leave the lid on, you don't want to check it. A lot of people have written in saying, I think my straw got too dry. I'd like to add more water. Um, in that case, what do you do if you feel like it goes too dry? Because I obviously, being a beginner myself, I would love to educate myself just so I can help to educate other people. But it's really hard to do that when I don't know the answer to that.
That's a really good question. And if it feels like it's too dry and it's that's actually gonna like stall it out and make it colonize way slower. So it's probably not making that much progress sitting there. I would just open it up and add water. You're not gonna ruin your bucket by opening the lid too soon unless there's like a bunch of mold floating around in your space. But it's if it seems like it's dry, like that's kind of like almost as bad. So mushrooms are 80% water. So if they start getting too dry, it's just nothing's gonna happen. Or I had this one little mushroom block going once that was so it was just so dry and it was really dry in that building. And they grew like Barbie sized mushrooms that were like hard as rock. It was really ridiculous. So yeah, at that point, and I mean, kind of like you were saying, like there's like, instructions exist and they work to a point or they're like cool to a point, but then there's a point when you're like, okay, but this seems like it would work better. Mushrooms are very friendly to that. And as you work with them and tinker with them, you're just going to find things that are like, oh, we should try that. And that's going to be interesting. And it's very, I don't know, there's just a lot of space to tinker. So I always tell people to keep their lids on and it will, if you have a healthy bucket that's well hydrated and it's cruising along, you just don't want to be opening it all the time because you will set yourself back a couple of days letting out that CO2. They'll come out weird shaped. But it's, if it's just something where you're like, I need to dial this in or tweak this a little bit, just go for it. So you're at 7:48 here. I meant to take an intermission halfway through and we didn't because I was blah blah blahing. So I think we have about 15 minutes left here. But if anyone does need a break, it's cool. And this is recorded, so we will share that with you later so you can loop back. And we are also doing the Tuesday night session as well. So you're always welcome there too. But okay, what about temperature or where should you place your bucket? So that's a really good question. These are really flexible mushrooms. Cordyceps mushrooms are like the most temperamental tinkering mushrooms, and you actually have to keep them at like exactly 72 degrees for an exact number of days in total darkness, and then let the light happen and then let them grow at a different temperature. But with these, actually like all three varieties that we're doing in this workshop, the pink oyster, the blue oyster, and the lion's mane, those are all do pretty well from like 60 to 80 degrees. Blues like to be on the cooler end of that. Pinks like to be on the warmer end of that. And lions like to be in the middle of that range. None of them are going to stop growing outside of those temperatures. But what you'll find is with both the blue and the pink, at lower temperatures, like if you're like 60, 65 degrees, you're going to get brighter colors, but smaller mushrooms. And then if you're doing lion's mane and it's getting too warm, then they get fussy once it starts getting too warm. They don't really like going over 75 degrees. But then pink oyster are originally tropical and they will actually get like way bigger if they're warmer. Blue oysters, once they start hitting about 80 degrees, they start getting cranky, but that's a good temperature range. They need a little bit of light every day. You could go as far as having it, in a like living area, like well lit kind of space. But you would also be fine, like if it's a basement and you have a light bulb and that light bulb's on a timer and it just pops on for a couple hours a day, that would work too. You can put it in a shady area on your deck if it's not snowing like crazy out. Or you can do, you know, like straw bed outdoors. So there's a lot of range to how you can do temperature wise, but I generally say try and stay between 65 to 80 degrees. The main thing, and we'll go over this real quick, how to care for your bucket in just a minute, as soon as I catch up with everyone. But the main thing is when you set up your bucket, you just don't want it to be in like a severely dry spot. Like if you're setting it right next to a dehumidifier, that's not going to go well. But it doesn't need to be. A lot of people think that they need to have like a, you know, fully humidified grow tent with all this expensive equipment and extra stuff and bells and whistles, and that's really not necessary. I have a pretty big setup just because it's my whole life, but for most people growing, like a bucket on the counter is good. Buckets in the garage. If you get into where you're growing a lot of mushrooms, like, and by a lot, I mean like you're growing it up for the farmer's market, or you know, you're providing for restaurants or something, you would want to get a grow tent, partly because that many mushrooms pull in a lot of moisture, and you're going to find it hard to keep up with the moisture, like keep them hydrated all the way when you're doing like a ton of 5-gallon buckets. Whereas these guys, you actually just mist with a spray bottle of water once or twice a day. You just spray right above the holes. And you only do that once the mushrooms start growing. So it's a lot simpler when you're doing small containers. But it's not that hard when you're doing big containers. You just have to plan a little bit to make sure the humidity's going well for them. So, all right, I'm almost to the top here. And all right, so got my mushroom lasagna here. And I keep looking at like the wrong camera. I'm forgetting it's here. So sorry if I feel like I'm just looking away from everyone. This lid on. I tend to try to remember to write the name of everything I'm growing and the date on it, because I think I'm going to remember right now, but in 2 weeks I'm not. So generally do that. But all you have to do, get the lid on, make sure your tape's on there. And then this could just sit nicely in the counter. And with all these varieties, you're looking at about 2 or 3, let's say 3 or 4 weeks. If it's pink oyster or blue oyster, to the point where you're like actually going to see like a lot of that mycelium growing up the sides here. It's not really like a lot to see here, but something. So you're going to see like mycelium, that white stuff, just starting to grow up out the outside of this. And then you just have to like keep an eye on it and watch. And after a few weeks, you'll see these tiny baby mushrooms pop out, and it's like the coolest thing ever. And then it's wild because once you see those little mushrooms, they're called pins, when they're in that state, you take a spray bottle, just like a spray bottle of water, like a misting bottle is really great, and you spray above the holes only once they start doing the pin thing, and you will pull the tape off wherever. Sorry, I keep there. You pull the tape off, and you can just, I don't know, toss it, whatever, and this little mushrooms will be growing out. You just keep misting above that once or twice a day. Usually they're not going to grow out of every single hole. It seems like with these containers, they usually like to pick 2 holes and they leave 1 for an air hole. Different for every single bucket though. It's fun to find out what they do. And then, so you're misting above this once or twice a day. And within about a week, those little tiny mushroom pins that are 1/2 inch tall turn into these beautiful full-fledged mushrooms that are then ready to harvest and enjoy. So it's very like there's this patience involved in waiting a few weeks for everything to colonize. But then once that's happened, you can just almost see them growing, and it's really, really cool. So that's what happens there. So I'm going to just run through the very quick list of what we did here, so we have the bullet point list. So, all right, so we have our bucket. We drilled holes in it. These holes are about 1/2 inch. You could go a little bigger. I like this size for this size container. I tend to do slightly bigger containers or slightly bigger holes on 5-gallon buckets, but not much, maybe just like 3/4 of an inch or something. So anyway, bucket, drilled it, wiped it down, you soaked your straw, you put your tape over the holes, then you just layered this in crumbles with your grain spawn all the way to the top. You put your lid on, write your name on it. Sometimes we name them too, give them a silly name. But you do that, and then you let it sit for a few weeks. Then you see your little baby mushrooms growing out of it. And you can spray above that with water every day. Peel off the tape wherever you see those little mushroom pins going. And then after about another week of that, you'll get a full-fledged mushroom. And that's for pink oyster and blue oyster. You use the same process for lion's mane, except that it tends to take maybe a week or two longer than the oyster mushrooms do to get fully colonized. So you just got to plan for like a pinch longer growing phase, but they do grow quickly. So that is the process there. And let's see, can you show your grow area in a video in the future? Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do a video. I'm in the process of starting a bunch of new buckets and we're doing all kinds of wild stuff down there. So I'll take some nice videos and stuff and kind of give you a walkthrough tour to check it out. It's you know, a lot of it I've really managed to scavenge different places. You can spend an absolute fortune on, you know, a grow tent or, you know, some meters or whatever, which is great if that makes sense for what you're doing. But sometimes you're just like passionate, but you don't necessarily want to invest a huge like commercial operation worth into it. And for me, like I'm Irish Scottish and I like a good deal. So if you go on Marketplace, they're like everyone's selling their grow tents and you know, like gauge it out. You don't want to come home with a stinky tent, but you know, I got a really, really, really good one on there and it even came with the roof lifter. So it's like 12 feet high and 20 feet long and 10 feet wide. And then I became friends with the person that I got it from, and we just like have the best conversations. So it really worked out well. And then, you know, for humidifiers, for a big tent like that, you need to like really pump some humidity into that. And you can get like a, what's it called? Like a cool mist humidifier that has the snorkel thing on top of it, but then get like a 35 or 55-gallon drum and you fill that with water and just like drill holes in the top for the top attachment for the cool mist thing. And Dr. Seuss it into the tent there. So you're actually, you don't want it to be in the tent because it will like fry the electronics very quickly. But you do that, you can pump like just nice consistent humidity in there so you're not lugging tons of water all the time, because smaller humidifiers just, I mean, you're going to be lugging around gallons of water all day if you have a smaller reservoir. Those are really the two biggest things you need if you wanted to set up like a good sized grow tent. And honestly, nobody nobody that isn't growing commercially needs a 10 by 20 tent. A 9x6 tent is fantastic. You can grow so many mushrooms in that, and you can probably find one for like $50 on Marketplace that someone didn't even get around to using. So definitely check that out if that's something you're interested in doing. Yes. So do you know when to harvest? Yes. So, and I will make sure that I email some photos of specific examples of each variety. But, and I really should have like a mushroom here that I can just hold and point at. Do I have a mushroom poster? Not one that makes sense. So I have a picture here. Let me see if I can drop a photo in here really quick. So what you're looking for, I'm about to upload a picture here for you to check out of these pink oysters. And this is a good rule of thumb for both pink and blue oysters, is you'll see the cap is flattening out and it's just slightly curled under at the edge. And those are like perfect. You'll notice that after a day or two of that, they'll start getting ruffly around the edges. And at that point, they're starting to drop spores and they're going to start decomposing. So at that point, they're like really getting past their prime. If they haven't become slimy or smelling weird, they're okay to still eat. But once they get roughly like you don't want to wait that long because you will have them dropping spores and if you have allergies or something, it gets annoying. I do have like extraordinary seasonal allergies, and once like if I'm in a space where spores have definitely been dropping, like it really affects me. But as long as I'm harvesting them on time and not neglecting them, then I don't run into any issues. So that is just a good rule of thumb if you do tend to run into seasonal allergy type stuff. Um, oh, hmm. Hmm. I share, is that how it is? Um, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to share a photo, which should be like more simple, but is there a trick, do you know?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm not sure. It just yeah, I'm not familiar with Zoom. We use a software called StreamYard. You
I
should look
looked,
at it. StreamYard is really easy to share pictures with during live streams. But yeah, I don't know. Um I was reading through the questions and I'm really happy. Mike Thompson actually asked some really important questions that I would love to know too.
oh,
Just again from questions that customers have asked me that yeah, truly I don't know the answer to. So I'd love to hear those as well. Just because yeah, Mike, I think he asked a couple questions that they were actually on my list of things to ask.
that's a really good question. So I think I've said that's a really good question like 18 times tonight, but I meant it every single time. Like these are very good questions. Um, so with that, it's kind of like when the grain spawn is already colonized pretty well to a point, it's got a lot of gusto and it's probably going to stand on its own. I usually don't bother retaping it at that point, but if you're more like leaning towards like the super clean, like let's just err on the side of clean, like that's a great thing. If you have it, might as well. Um, a lot of the times I will actually start oyster buckets without putting tape on the holes at all because they do grow so fast. But I don't know, I just don't want to waste stuff, so I do try to like put it on there at least for that first round so that I don't have to rebuild my bucket right away. The second round though, I generally don't bother. And again, with like more persnickety mushrooms, you might want to, but for oysters or lion's mane, it's really not a big deal. And how long does it take to regrow? Yeah, so usually with oysters, you're looking at like 2 weeks and you're going to see more mushrooms happening, if not sooner. Oysters are very aggressive growers. They're very fast. I think they're the fastest out of any of the mushrooms that I've worked with. And that is why I like them so much for people getting started. They're versatile and they grow fast enough to be like, wow, I can do this. And then they taste good and they're valuable, so it's great. But usually you're looking at about 2 weeks from when you harvest that first flush, and then you soak it in water and then keep going. Are you trying to share your screen? Thank you, anonymous attendee. I'm actually trying to upload a image here, which I'm sure I'm gonna just have figured out any second here. Let's see. Okay. Can I just maybe I can throw it in the chat? Can everyone see the chat? I don't know. I'll send out an email later with some photos in it, and this weekend I will educate myself on how to upload a photo in Zoom. All right. Oh, Ken, that's a good question there. So misting into the holes or onto the new shrooms? Thanks, Bunches. Thank you, Bunches. So you want to spray above the holes. The idea there is actually that if you spray directly at the holes, it's going to bruise the caps on the mushrooms and you'll have these like weird little splotches. And then as they grow, that can look more like dents or pocks, which is, I mean, it's not going to affect the flavor, but if you want them to be pretty and up to like the standard expectation of how they look, spray above it. That way they look a little better. And that is the idea with like a misting bottle as opposed to just a regular spray bottle. I use both. It's for me, I'm like, it's convenient and I don't seem to run any issues with it. But if you do have a misting bottle, it's just gentler the way it hits the surface, so that can be really great. What is the best? Are they best cut and used, or can you put them in the fridge when cut? You know, so I have 4 kids, and they're like wild about mushrooms. So mushrooms just don't really make it into the fridge cut. They get eaten before they ever make it there at our house because someone wants to eat them. But I've seen them do fine, like when other people do that. I think personally, I would lean towards just don't cut them up until you put them in the fridge, unless you happen to cut up a bunch, or don't cut them up until you're ready to use them when they've been in the fridge, unless you cut up a bunch and you're like, oh, we have extras, like they're not gonna just go bad faster or something, but I feel like you do maintain the texture a little better if you wait until you're ready to use them to cut them up. And then the best way to store these, out of all of these, the pink oysters decompose the fastest. They are by far the fastest grower, but they decompose fastest. And so you don't want to leave those sitting around on the counter because they'll be gone in a couple days. The best thing you can do with pink oysters is if you just put them in a paper bag in like the crisper drawer in your fridge where it's not freezing, but it's got a nice chill to it. That usually gets about 5-6 days out of them for us. Any longer than that, they don't hold up. Blue oysters have a long shelf life. They hold up really well, and those I've left blue oysters on the counter for like 5 days and then cooked them up, and they're still just beautiful and have a velvety surface, and they're great. But again, they would last even longer, paper bag in the fridge. You just don't want it to be anywhere. If you have any like really cold spots in your fridge where they're going to be, potentially getting like frozen edges or something, that there's so much water in mushrooms that it causes their cells to rupture if they freeze, and so you lose your consistency there. So yes, paper bag in the fridge works really well. If you had to, it's okay to put them in there when they're cut. And I'm assuming you mean like diced. I guess I should have clarified that, but I'm assuming you're picturing like diced or filleted or something. But if you just mean like when they've been cut off the bucket, yeah, put them in a paper bag, throw them in the fridge. So, and that's pretty true with all mushrooms. If they're gourmet mushrooms that have been harvested and you are going to eat them in a few days, paper bag in the fridge. So, all right. We're getting to 8:08 here. So I'm going to make sure we get through our questions and get detailed because I'm sure everyone's a little tired, but I also don't want to rush anyone off. So if you have any questions, go ahead and add them now so I can make sure I answer you. And then again, we will also be doing, and I will also send out a doc covering the steps that we talked about. And then we're also doing the session on Tuesday evening. That's going to be at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to be going through the same steps. I'll probably have my camera dialed in even better so you can see better. But I love the Q&A sessions. That's always my favorite part. I love the mushroom part, but hearing people's thoughts and ideas and things that came up during this process is always so interesting to me, and there's always new stuff that comes up that I hadn't thought of. So yeah. And Mike was asking about, we were just talking about Mike's question. Let's see. You're looking for a green share screen button. Thank you, Sherry. So I see the share button, but it only gives me the option to share my screen or an app. Oh, I guess this would work. Hold on. All right, I'm about to show you guys this. Hold on. There we go. So all right. So I'm not sure if you can see that. Can you see this here? Yeah. So do you see how those edges there? Maybe I can zoom in a little bit even. Yeah. So if you look at these edges, this is like an absolutely flawless example of The pink oyster mushroom is ready to harvest. And as far as locations go, this one I set up and set on top of our dryer and forgot about and walked in 10 days later and it was gorgeous. So the laundry room can be a really nice temperature for these tropical mushrooms. But yeah, so you look there, see how it's got a little ridge there on the bottom, almost like the edge of an ear or something. It's just slightly curled under. So that's the perfect time with pink oysters to actually get to harvest those. And you can either just twist them off of the side of the bucket, or you can like get a sharp knife and cut them. The only thing I warn people about with cutting them off with a knife, other than like look out for your hands, is if you cut them off there, it can actually kind of like make a plug of where you cut it off and block up that whole hole right there. So whereas if you twist it, it makes like more of a dent in there where it's kind of can breathe more and isn't blocked. So if you like notice that there's some mushrooms really fighting to get out of there, oyster mushrooms are very strong. They usually can get through whatever they're trying to get through like that. But if you notice one is just seeming like kind of jammed there, that is a good thing to look for. And then let me just show you lion's mane when it's ready. So all right. This. Oh, I'm gonna just get super into sharing my screen now that I know how. So, all right, so here, this, that. Is it gonna go? I thought there was a second foot here. Maybe not. So these things, these are actually slightly longer than would be ideal. The wispy things are called teeth. And so those, you're aiming for those to be about a quarter of an inch long. That's the ideal time to harvest those. So they'll look shaggy, but they won't necessarily look like this, like is pushing into like really shaggy territory. But yeah, it's still, I mean, that's a healthy mushroom, but in an ideal world, you would pick that one that's about a quarter inch long. You'll notice like right there, those ends maybe look a tiny bit dry. If that had been picked exactly when it was a quarter inch long, then it wouldn't have had time to get dry like that. And I am absolutely criticizing my own product photo, but still like it. So, all right. So let's do a last check on questions here. Again, I will make sure we send out a doc that just recaps instructions and make sure you got what you need. If for some reason you were one of the people that was having a hard time getting emails from me or like getting links, make sure you add me to your contacts that grow at the Mushroom Conservatory, because I've had a lot of emails get stuck in spam recently. So I want to make sure you're getting everything you're after. So where is this? Okay. All right. I'm just trying to see the questions pane one more time, and then I think we're good. Cindy and Luke, do you have any last questions?
Honestly, I am actually, you've answered all my questions. I am,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love how everything's it's so easy.
It's
is.
really easy.
Yeah.
And it's really fun just to see them grow. And then, I don't know, you're going to get really, really, really excited when they grow. No one's ever ready for like how exhilarating that is. So,
Yeah, we've had a couple of your kits from previous workshops that the girls have set on the table, and when they start to bloom out and form, it's really super cool. And like you said, I think one of the nice things is that if you just buy a box from the store, you're kind of just it's there and done, and you don't really have that learned experience. Whereas, for this is that next step where you're starting to educate, but you're not like, you're still very much in a very beginner friendly phase.
Yeah, it's not like a finished cake. It's kind of like, the Betty Crocker cake mix, where you got to be engaged a little bit in doing it. So
Yeah,
that's fun.
this is
Mhm.
a just add water box cake.
Just
Yeah.
add water, but then you'll remember what you did and you can keep adding water.
Yeah, and it's and whereas like yeah, exactly. There's certain satisfaction in something for a beginner for me where like this is a very hands-on way to at least learn about the process. And then obviously as you said, then the world is your oyster mushroom.
Really. And, yeah, I love that it lets people know that they can do it. And that's like the most exciting part of this for me, is just to see people have this sort of revelation of realizing that they have this whole skill that they didn't know was possible for them to achieve. So it's really fun. And yeah, but let's see, did I miss anything? After you harvest, you wet the bucket for a second harvest. Yes. So you'll do that for 2 or 3. This is Kim's question here. After harvest, you wet the bucket for the second harvest. Yes, you're just gonna do that until like you'll harvest your mushrooms and then do the overnight soak. And then once that's kind of starting to get weaker, like sometimes you get 4 if you're like really lucky, but it's usually bigger buckets just because they hold more moisture for longer. But for this size bucket, 2 or 3, that's a pretty good expectation. And you just soak it every time you harvest it. And then the straw is eventually going to feel flimsy and light, and it's going to just seem like kind of done, and throw it in the compost or whatever. Sometimes I like you're welcome and throw some into the trash just because I know it'll wind up in a landfill and maybe help. But um let's see. And then as far as, oh, by the way, Sherry, thank you for helping me get through the green share button. And then Cherie and Martin, so freezing them, if you freeze them raw, they're gonna get mushy when they thaw, and it's just not even worth dealing with. If you cook them, you can freeze what you cooked, and that tends to work out just because you already cooked out a lot of that water, so you're not having like the water cells rupturing. But if you have a dehydrator, they dehydrate great. And a lot of the time, if I have like some little mushrooms left over that just it wasn't enough for a meal, but too much to throw out, then I'll dehydrate them and I'll grind them up and I'll put them in like a salt or pepper shaker. And what I do with that, like it's still, you want to cook it because the flavor hasn't popped until oyster mushrooms cook, but you can use that for flavoring soups and sauces, so that, it's like you're in a lull on growing them or whatever, but you still have a nice way to work that flavor and wellness into your cooking. So we do a lot with that. They freeze dry really well. You can can them, and if there's a multitude of things. One of these days we need to do like a preserving mushrooms book. I would love that. And okay. If the heat in your laundry room helped your mushroom grow, would a germination mat for germinating seeds help us grow our mushrooms? So that is a question that I've tinkered with. And the trick, if you're going to do that, first make sure it's like a tropical mushroom, that like a pink oyster or another one that prefers the warmer temperatures. But you need to make sure either put like a seed tray upside down on that mat, or maybe like a towel. Luke, maybe that's dangerous. Is it dangerous to put a towel on a seed mat?
No, not really. They any good ones typically regulate. Like we have our for instance, our line of heat mats that we sell. A lot of people could do those for. They'll even make like sourdough with them.
Oh, that's
Um, and or they'll brew their kombucha with them. It's because they have a built-in temperature regulator that typically shuts off way before any risk of fire. There's usually more of a risk, like if you spill water on them or whatever, and there's an exposed, like there's more risk of electrocution than there is a fire, like
okay.
way more.
Okay.
So yeah,
Well,
generally
in that case,
that's fine.
you have the official seal of approval. As long as you have one of their good ones and not like a shady, not so certified one. Putting like a folded towel on top of the seed mat has been good. I've just found if I put a mushroom bag or bucket directly on it, it tends to be just slightly too hot and it makes it start fermenting. And if your mushroom bucket's fermenting, you'll know, like it's not a good smell. It's just, you're like, oh, that's over. So a towel or seed rack upside down, or just something that holds it a little bit off, but it can still get that ambient heat. Seems to work well. I also had one time I was like really in a hurry. I think we had an event coming up and I needed like this number of pounds of mushrooms for the event, and I had like a styrofoam cooler. And so I tucked a seed mat in there and then put a towel around that, and I just stuck my mushroom block in there like a little incubator. And it worked surprisingly well, and I had the mushrooms I needed in time. So that's just a tinker, but there's a lot of interesting tinkery stuff you can do. Other than allergy symptoms you mentioned, are there any other health concerns with growing these inside your home? So generally, no. The only time I would be concerned about that is, again, if you're growing like commercial quantities of mushrooms where you're like have 20, 30, 40 big buckets of mushrooms growing, then you're definitely like releasing way too many spores into your atmosphere, and it's not good for you or your house to do like that kind of mushroom growing in your house. But if you're doing like small bucket kind of stuff, you're fine. It's really the only thing to look out for is the like spore drop. You just want to make sure you're like harvesting them when they're that curled cap. If they start to ruffle, you probably still have a second, couple hours to get them, but you just want to keep tabs on them. Or like if you're going to be out of town right when you think that's going to happen, like let a friend babysit them and they'll probably fall in love with growing mushrooms too. But yeah, that's the biggest thing I've run into with those. And I also, I guess I don't also anything. That was just my whole thought about that. How long will this kit produce mushrooms on average? So this, like these that we made tonight, this will keep going. Like it takes 6 weeks for it to kick into action, like and start fruiting really. And that's like to your harvest point, not just like starting to do anything. But so you get your first harvest, and then 2 weeks later you're getting another harvest. 2 weeks later, so you're looking at 2.5, 3 months. But you should really count on 2 or 3 flushes from this. I typically get about a pound per flush off of a gallon. That can vary depending on if it's like super, super dry in your house. Most houses are at a fairly consistent humidity level around here. Like it's probably not of concern. I just wouldn't leave it too close to like a heater or furnace where it's like actually actively drying the air out of here. Thanks, punches. Let's see. Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. And all right, I think I answered all the questions. If I didn't, send me a note. I'm here to cheer for you. I want to see you succeed. If anything is confusing, like just let me know. I respond as fast as I can. I should have a secretary, but I don't. So I'm the person who responds to the emails when you send them to me. So I do respond as fast as I can, but sometimes it does take me a day or two. But send me your questions. I love questions, and I love seeing people succeed. I love seeing like victories, hearing how it's going. Catastrophes. I like to see what's happening with the mushrooms. And last thing is, if you have like cats or something and you're concerned they're going to try and eat the mushrooms, these are not cat toxic varieties that you really need to be concerned about. So don't panic if they try and investigate it. So anyway, thank you so much, Luke and Cindy, for letting me come and play with mushrooms and teach people things. And it's always a treat and an honor to team up with you guys.
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate it. This was great for me. This was really great for me.
Awesome. We gotta scheme like your mushroom plan of attack for the farm. I've got like 900 ideas. We can get you going with that, and gotta start with the wine caps in the springtime.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you figure out how to get some of those little wooden dowel mushroom plugs going, we will I don't feel confident to start my own, but we'll be a customer if you decide that you want to sell some to us. We would definitely love to get some going for sure.
Oh, I got you. We'll make it happen.
All right.
Yeah, we need
That's
more
awesome.
for us. Well, everyone have a wonderful night, and thank you all for being here. And go support MIgardener. They do awesome things, like letting people like me do awesome things. So thank you guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.